welcome to the Xtra Edge, a sports analytics podcast powered by KINEXON Sports. I'm Dave Grendzynski, and today we are talking with Jim Krumpos and Dayannara Muñoz, who's an assistant coach for performance for enhancement at the University of Arizona. But Jim is the assistant athletic director for performance enhancement and director of Olympic sports at the University of Arizona, the home of those Wildcats. Jim and Dianara, I know they call you Dave for short, so if you will, I will call you Day as well. So thank you, Jim and Dave, for joining us here on the Xtra Edge today.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Excited to be here. Excited to talk a little. It's always good to talk shop and to get to meet other people and hopefully do something that and bring some ideas out that maybe other people can help with their own programs.
Well, that's our mission. And I know your mission is to design comprehensive year-round sport-specific training regimens, but you're also collaborating with sports medicine when you're rehabbing a player, and you wear a lot of hats. You're working with multiple sports, I know. But can you give us, let's start with you, Jim. Can you give us a little more detail about your role at Arizona?
Yeah, I mean, I really have a kind of unique role where I do oversee the entire performance department. That's all the strength and conditioning coaches. I like to use the term strength and performance coaches now because, like you just kind of mentioned, we have so many. We deal with so many aspects of performance besides the old school, just lifting weights and making them do sprints. So I oversee the entire strength and performance staff. I oversee the nutrition staff. And then I still currently train, obviously indoor volleyball and then the baseball teams as well. So I get to have my fun part of my day is actually being on the floor, coaching people, trying to learn new performance, techniques and methods, and but also a lot of administrative role as well.
And then there's Dianara. And so let's find out what is a day in the life of Day like.
Yeah, so I work for Jim, so he's an awesome boss. I'm just going to plug that in there. I work with women's triathlon, men's golf, and the swimming and diving team here. So those are the teams that I work with out on the floor. And then additional duties, one of them is helping Jim with basically the technology part with volleyball. So that's why I'm including this podcast today. So I have a good mixture of being out on the floor and just having these additional duties with technology and just getting used to that sports science world.
Well, we're glad to have you, Day. And, we're also in the company of greatness because in my research for this podcast, if you don't know Jim from his great work at Arizona, you may know him from this great YouTube video that went viral back in 2016 when Arizona was in the College World Series. And it's Jim being interviewed by former Wildcats baseball player Casey Bowman. And this became a big thing during that College World Series. But you were one of the interviews. And it may have been without even knowing it, it may have been your first interview about sports data and analytics that you were doing at the time, because he's crediting you with your talented stretching techniques that you used on reliever Cameron Ming as a key to victory that day. Ming, of course, now a pitching coach with the Seattle Mariners. And what I thought was great was he's asking you what his best lift was, and you told him he's captain bench press. So you call him, but I only bring that up because, Coach, it just really speaks to me as far as the culture and the relationships that coaches and players develop and the trust that you have to have in each other. And I don't know if, if you've ever thought about that at the time, but me watching that, to me, that spoke to the culture that you create at Arizona.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. That was obviously a really fun run, and that's what I really that's our messaging, and that's how we operate here as a staff. It's not hard to find somebody that knows how to teach the lifts, but it's really challenging to find somebody who's good with people. Not only good energy, what we expect in this profession, but also good with coaches, good communicating with coaches, good knowing their roles and how to work collaboratively with the sport coaches, and also knowing how to build those relationships with the athletes, because that's so important every day, and being able to have them be able to be honest with you about what how they feel, what's going on, be able to make the daily adjustments, and be able to know when to push. And sometimes, hey, you're going to be tired, you're going to be sore, but we got to push. But also being smart enough that, hey, your back is maybe whatever tight. So I'm going to make some modifications today so that you're able to practice or play in a game tomorrow. And I don't do anything, in here that's going to affect your ability to do that. So it's all about people. This is a people business. And the longer I do this, the more I realize that, I've seen a lot of really knowledgeable professionals that they end up being better as consultants or maybe personal trainers, because you got to be able to be great with a team day in and day out, and be great with the entire support staff now, where you have the dietitians, the sports psych, the athletic trainers. It's a much more collaborative world, as opposed to when I first started doing that, where they just kind of came in, they lifted, and then that was that. Like, no, now this is a very collaborative, day in and day out venture revolving around practice and competitions, way more so too than we ever had to do 25 years ago.
Well, and it gets results too, because that team that year lost you made it to the World Series, lost in 3 games after winning Game 1 to Coastal Carolina. But so you're not just there to make movies, right, and have fun. But it's all part of it. But for the purposes of this podcast, we're going to talk women's volleyball, but I think we're going to spread this out across all sports, just because the two of you, you have so much experience in so many different sports, and we can talk about sports in general. But if we want to get specific about things, and I know the volleyball team, you were juggling a younger roster this year, but you've had 2 winning seasons out of the last 3. You've produced multiple All-Americans. What I'm wondering, and Jim, let's start with you. I'm curious to find out, because we talk about the data, the insights, and the actions on this podcast, typically in that order. And we'll start with the data. My first question to you is, how much do you think the data has helped over the years, whether it's with volleyball specifically or the sports you work with in general? How much has having data helped you coach these athletes?
I think, good question. I think that what comes to mind for me initially off the bat is, making sure that the data is the most helpful tool for me to make sure that the players that aren't playing a lot, who might be called into play if there's an injury or something happens, that they're receiving the proper load throughout a season, so that they do have to come in, they're ready to go. And there's not a huge drop off with their conditioning or whatever, their ability to jump multiple times, whatever, those metrics are, where, before the data, a lot of that was you really had to know the sport and get in there and know the coach and know the style of play. And, we were doing the best we could, but we didn't really have numbers to put to that. So that's where I've seen it very helpful. And I think the other thing that I've seen really helpful with the data is sometimes, there might be a discrepancy, or coach thinks that somebody is not working hard, or coach thinks something that's they're just seeing on the field. And there could be a myriad of reasons why they're seeing that, right? Why the kid looks fatigued, why the kid maybe doesn't look like they're giving enough effort. And when you can put numbers to those things and find some of these outliers, one of the first times the data really made an improvement for me was just, 12 years ago, looking at heart rate stuff. And we were able to identify a kid that always seemed, always had a really high heart rate, and always seemed to be kind of deconditioned, even though she was fine with my conditioning drills, made her times during the sprints and all that kind of stuff. And the elevated heart rate, especially on certain days, and the HRV data that we were looking at, was able to we were able to take a deeper dive and find out, well, no, actually she was deficient in some minerals and wasn't sleeping enough. And so just by addressing those issues, all of a sudden now her heart rate went down and she was able to practice and compete at a higher level. And it wasn't, the coach wanted to go the route of, no, this is a conditioning, she's not in good enough shape. And I was like, no, she is in good enough shape. So that was a real turning point for me with starting to use the data. And now I think I love the data really too in the weight room, and just being able to put numbers on everything that they do, not only the number of jumps, but bar speed and just all these different metrics, and just put together a really comprehensive program.
And what about you, Dianara? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I came from the private sector before joining the staff here. And in the private sector, we don't usually, most gyms don't have a lot of technology out there. So you're basing things off of, previous lifts, load intensity, and like Jim mentioned, like your perception of their rate, whether that's their own RPE scale and what you're seeing. So a lot of times it's hard to have that objective data to know how to progress and what rate. We usually have an idea of what's the proper progression typically, but everyone is so individual, and sometimes you're going to see those one-offs and all that. So being exposed to all the technology here, it's really helping just give numbers and kind of seeing like, oh, okay, I had this plan, but now I'm seeing the load was way higher the past 2 days. So maybe we're going to need to address that. And just giving those numbers and talking that, sending that message to coaches as well, and giving them more information so they could also make more informed decisions. So it's just giving that extra like piece of the puzzle, because we can't know everything, but it's really cool to kind of see pieces and have them come together so that we can make the best plan that is the most effective.
Well, and as Dianara coming from the private sector, Jim, what intrigues me about you, and I'm interested to hear your answer to this question, because I mean, I'm not trying to date you, but I mean, you've been doing this a long time, and I'm very curious to find out, like, how did you come about data? How did you start using it? Because I mean, back in the day, back when I was playing, I'm sure back when you were playing, this wasn't around. This kind of stuff didn't exist. What attracted you to it, and what won you over? Can you give me the background and when you found data, or when data found you?
Yeah, I think some of the early examples I can think of are just using the old Tendo units and just being able to put a number. And then what I saw was just the increased effort. Once you had some numbers out there and athletes started to compete about who can move the bar the fastest, just like, oh, wow, just by having some data and some numbers out there, we were able to increase effort, so that was great, and increase some competition, which was great. And then I think really starting to use data metrics through some programming, and be able to really calculate load in a really year-round way, and really be able to put numbers on the load and be able to meet the training goals that you had. And then, my first experience with, like more of the practice data and the GPS data was really a huge turning point for us as well, because now we're really able to put numbers on and say, hey, like, coach, you said this was going to be an easy practice day because we have a game tomorrow. But the data actually shows that it really wasn't, whatever metrics we were looking at, you actually had a really high intensity day. And so we were able to manage the load better to make sure that the athletes, got enough load so that enough game load so that when they did have to compete, as opposed that we were able to meet that, and they had met that. They weren't overreaching, but also that we were staying true to our practice plan of the week. On days that we wanted to have lighter load, we were doing that. Days that we needed to do some top end sprints and those type of things, we were able to do that. And so I think being able to maximize their output and prepare them efficiently was really important.
And I think, Dianara, I want to ask you this, because so now you have a coach who kind of comes cold in the data. You learn about it. It doesn't exist when you get into this business, right? And now it does. And so now you start adding it to what you're doing. But then you Dianara, there's somebody like you working in the private sector. I mean, did you even think you'd be working for the University of Arizona when you started your career? All of these different types of job opportunities and the data that you work with today. Did you even think something like that would exist maybe 5 years ago?
Definitely not. No, I wasn't familiar with any of the technology actually. So luckily, like, I like numbers, I like data, so that works out really well. So when I was exposed to all the stuff we have here, all the range of technology, it's like, all right, cool. How can I use this? And I just started implementing with like my own teams, implement it here and there, and kind of see like what metrics are, what I could look at. And then helping Jim out with volleyball, it's kind of been fun just getting all the data and just like digging deep into it and seeing like, oh, this is cool. This is something that seems useful. Oh, let's look into this. Oh, that's probably not useful. And then creating, products with that data, like dashboards and just charts and all this stuff and graphics. So never did I think I would be using all of this stuff before, but it's really cool now having it all at my disposal and seeing the impact it has.
And so, Dianara, I'm going to ask you this question first, and Jim, you're going to get it as well. And I like to ask this to everybody who comes on. When you're looking at all the metrics and all the things you follow, and if it's easier to hone in on one sport, that's fine. But I'm wondering what your top 3 metrics are, or if it's something that you can say this kind of applies to so many sports. I would say you should monitor this, you should track this, you should track this across the board in any sport. But Dianara, let's start with you. Over the years and crunching all the numbers, what would you say? And you don't have to give away any secrets. I don't want to put you on the spot and have you do that. But what would you say are the top 3 metrics coaches could pay attention to?
For me, if we're looking at something like GPS or IMUs, such as KINEXON, I think the load is always the main one I like to look at. So that's definitely the first one. If we're looking at like force plates, for example, I really just like to look at either peak power or relative peak power. I usually use both in conjunction. So that to see power output and fatigue monitoring, and that's across all teams. And the third one I would say is just with the strength side of it, kind of seeing the load variations throughout the week, and seeing also what their estimated 1 rep max is. So is their estimated 1 rep max going down over time? Maybe we need to change the progression or take a deload or something like that. So I like to pick like from different areas, and I would say those would be my top 3 for that.
And Jim, do you generally fall into the same boat, or do you have others that you like to look at as well?
Yeah, I'd say generally the same boat, the force plate stuff. The KINEXON, I would add the number of jumps. That's been a really great data point for us to have, and especially with return to play situations or people that were really trying to manage load, to be able to have those numbers has been huge with the KINEXON. And then I kind of mentioned earlier, but I do like the bar speed stuff, especially in season. Out of season for effort, I do like to play with it in certain strength phases to help make sure that we're attaining the goal that we're trying to get, whether that's strength, speed, strength, power. I do like the bar speed as well.
And it always fascinates me how the data and the insights are so like close together. You can't really talk about the data without talking about like the insights that you get. And we've touched on some of the insights, but I'm just wondering, do you ever have like, you ever sit back and look at some of this stuff, or one day you're just kind of sitting in the office and you're thinking back, Jim, and you go, man, you just have that aha moment, like, but we probably would not have known that if it wasn't for the data we're collecting. Do you have any, and you don't have to name names, but can you think of any examples where you're like, man, we would have never been able to manage that load or get her or him back on the field or on the court as fast as we did if we didn't have the knowledge that we had?
Yeah, some of the examples that I think really stand out to me off the top of my head are the return to play situations, right? Especially long-term return to play, ACL type of situations, where, a lot of times the athletes can meet some of the numbers that are required for them to progress from the PT, right? They've done some, isokinetic open chain tests, and maybe their girth is back and the range of motion is back, but there's a lot to be able to put numbers now to their jump landing, to their, like Dave mentioned, some of the force plate metrics, some of the eccentric force plate metrics, just gives you so much more insight into really where they're at and what their physical capabilities are before we just roll them into higher level training and practices. That's where I've seen it be, so valuable.
And Dave, what about you?
I would say the same thing. It's return to play. So I know that's one of the big things I've been using a lot of the data that I've been collecting with all my teams for is to have a plan if they do get injured. So, okay, we have a baseline of where they're at and how to get there. And I know that's a conversation amongst our staff that we're constantly having is how can we optimize this return to play using all the technology we have? So I've been finding that super, super useful and kind of having a plan for each of these athletes in case something does happen and they have to go through a process of rehab and all that good stuff.
Can you give me an example, Dave or Jim or both? Like what is when you're putting together your return to play protocol? Like, what is it that you would look at as far as the data or the analytics or something that's helping you safely get the player back on the court or on the field? What can you try and line up just from in a layman's terms, line up the connection between the the data, the insights, and then that getting them back on the field or on the court?
Yeah, I think, kind of like we mentioned, let's just look at whatever their peak force, what was their data before they got hurt and where are they at now in 5 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it is post, depending on the injury. Let's look at, unilateral discrepancies, is one side still, because that we all know that it's better to be overall tight or weak than to have a huge discrepancy. So being able to compare the good limb to the bad limb, and then even with some different motion analysis and stuff to be able to look at joint range of motion and really stability as well.
Day, anything to add to that?
Yeah, and in terms of like the KINEXON data that we're collecting, which is the load, exertions, and jumps, is we're seeing where athletes are during practice, during game load, and then how we can get back to there if they do take time off from the sport and how to progress them properly to that instead of just throwing them in to a full-on practice once they get the green light.
Yeah, and so I mean, in a lot of respects, then this is a much safer way. It really complements the coaching, right? It's because it takes, I guess, some of the guesswork out. I'm trying to think of the right way to say it, but I mean, in all, it's a safer way to get your athletes back playing again.
Yeah, no question, and I think too that once you get the sport coach buy-in too, then they're a lot more comfortable with it too. Where I think, back in the old day, you would say, hey, coach, whatever, this athlete only needs to do about 50% of practice today. What does that really look like? And then the coaches always, their jobs are on the line. They're going to get greedy. They're going to try to push it faster. But now you have some actual analytics to put to that. Say, hey, coach, they're at 50%. And I think that the sport coaches have also embraced this a lot more too, and realized that, hey, yeah, I know I need this kid back, but we need to do it back in a way that he or she can continue to progress and not just we re-injure them and then they're out even more.
Would you say, and Day, I'll start with you, just looking at it kind of across the board. And if the answer is, I don't know, if it's no, that's fine. But I'm just curious because, the two of you are working with so many, different sports, and you're working with you're working with some of the greatest athletes on the planet. We don't know it at the time, but, they all go on to the NBA or the Major League Baseball, or, they go on to all these other places. But I'm just curious, do you think the data and analytics have a bigger impact in one sport over another, or is it just based on the way you use it? Could have you seen that, or what do you think? I guess, Dave, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think some sports may benefit from it more than others, but I also think it depends on what technology you're using and what metrics you're looking at. For example, with the metrics and the technology we're using with volleyball, I probably wouldn't use it with my triathlon team because it's not really as applicable. But they have their own tests and technology metrics that I look at for them. And though the metrics are different, we use a lot of it for the same things, kind of seeing where the performance is at, having baselines for return to play protocols, making informed decisions on their training and communicating that with coaches and having a more effective plan. So technology and metrics are different, but they're both utilized, maybe to some extent more than others, but they're both heavily utilized, I would say, in all areas.
Jim, what about you and your experience?
Yeah, well, I think that, what I kind of see is there's almost three major categories now, where you have all your performance data that is really being utilized by the strength and performance coaches, right? The stuff in the performance facility, whether that's the VBT systems or whatever, the force plates. And then you have this other practice set of data that you're going to get from your GPS systems or your KINEXONs. And then what I've seen, in addition to that, was especially with in the baseball softball world, is there's all these now really sport specific technical metrics that you're getting on, during competition, during practice, with bar speed or bat speed and spin rate and exit velocity. And, so there's all these different categories. And I think that's where people are at now, is like, how do you put all those together and what correlates to what? And I'd be interested to learn, because everyone I've talked to really hasn't figured out a real great correlation between all three of those. What are some of the performance metrics that really correlate to these really sport specific metrics? That's where I think the future is going.
And, and it's intriguing for me to talk to you, well, both of you really, but Jim, because you're like the different sports that you work with. You go from basketball to diving, from volleyball to baseball. Like these are all on opposite ends of the planet. These sports. Has that made it easier or tougher on you as far as trying to figure out how to use the data?
Well, easier in ways that we talked about previously, but also tougher it's tougher to really dive into, okay, what do we want to look at? What is this? And a lot of it is driven by the sport coach. If the sport coach themselves isn't real interested in a lot of the data, or if the sport itself, really, like thinking about diving, right? Like what metrics would you look at? Really, there is a load component, right? They are going up and down that 10-meter platform however many times of practice. There is a load component, but we haven't figured out here how to really put metrics to that yet. And then I think it's when I first started getting involved with the metrics and the data, it was like, I think everybody was trying to look at way too many things. And then as I talked to more and more people at the highest levels, people kind of figured out, like, no, let's just be really good at 3 to 5 metrics, and let's not, try to worry about all these things. And now I think people are trying to look at all the things again, because now they have 2 or 3 sports science people that are trying to work with that. I think that the tough part for us as a performance coach is we're already writing the programs and implementing the programs and making adjustments. So if you don't have a robust sports science department, then you got to be a little bit more streamlined with what you're doing and very, very focused. And then I think you got to get to the point too, where you're going, okay, I have this data point. Is this data point changing anything that me or the sport coach is doing? If that's not occurring, then that's probably not a data point you need to spend time analyzing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Dave, to you, and what Jim was just talking about, you're kind of, well, Jim referred to you as the brains behind the operation, but from your perspective, when you're dealing, whether it's a new sport or you're going from sport to sport, and you have new coaches coming in, and I mean, in a sense, do you have to sell them on some things sometimes, or get them to understand, like, this is why, understand the why we're doing this, and this is why this metric is important? Do you go through some of that as well, Day?
Yeah, definitely. I think it all depends on the coach, right? It's kind of it's a process you have to go through. Some coaches are all on board with technology because they use it themselves and with their athletes. And then some of them may have had a ton of success without technology. So it's like, why do I need it? I've been coaching for X amount of years and never have I needed this information. So why are we throwing this in now? So it's creating that buy-in first. So definitely, I think it's like a conversation worth having. Definitely explaining the why, seeing where they're at with it. Because if they're not on board, then don't throw it at them all at once, right? You have to create that buy-in slowly. Start just collecting data, seeing if there are any trends. Is it useful? Will they find use in it? And then going from there.
And Jim, you mentioned, not only do you have the practice part of it, but then you have the off season. I mean, this is a year round activity. What happens. I mean, and I even saw an article, Jim, how you're working to try and make sure all your athletes are when they're not on campus or when they are in the off season, they're still doing what they're supposed to be doing. But Jim, let me ask you first, when it comes to the actions, and you mentioned, intensity always seems to come up in these conversations. And usually it's we need to make practice much more like a game, or like you mentioned, coach, you said this was going to be an easier practice and then it wasn't, but you have the data to look at. What would you say, Jim, is the biggest change when it comes to the actions that you take nowadays, whether it's in practice or in the off season, that collecting data and analytics and looking at it all? What are the biggest changes you have made to training regimens over the years?
What comes to the top of my mind is volleyball, and specifically, they're a unique sport because they're going to come back 5 weeks before the season starts. And so I'll have them for 5 weeks. And so now I can, with their conditioning stuff, use the KINEXON, use the data to make sure that we are getting the loads of the jumps, the accelerations that they're going to be experiencing in practice with my conditioning sessions, and set them up better so that, hey, once we start practicing, they're ready to go. I'm more confident that they're ready to go and be able to handle everything that the coach is going to throw at them, and you're just sort of more physically prepared.
And does it go back to, when you have that data to look at, where they're supposed to be, and if they're not where they're supposed to be?
Yeah, no question. I mean, it's much easier to now be able to know I have to get this many accelerations, this many jumps, this type of load, because that's what they're going to be experiencing as to, before, you're just making your best, guesstimate.
And Dianara, do you echo those sentiments, Day? What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. Exactly what Jim said, just getting more information where they're supposed to be at, how we could get them there in time.
Now, we spend a lot of time talking about all the things we get from data. And the last question I like to ask, and Day, I'll start with you. What's still missing? I mean, we have all this technology, and we're, every year we seem to get a little bit better at it. But is there anything where you come in every day and say, boy, I wish we had that? Is there anything still missing?
I think it's a hard one for me to answer, just because I'm, like I said, newer to the technology side of things. So to me, this is like, oh, this is great. This is everything I need. So I may have a better answer in a few years once I've had more experience with it. But right now, just collecting everything. And sometimes it's we're collecting all this data from all these different technologies, and I'm coding all these things and trying to find correlations and all this stuff. So that can be time consuming. But I think that's just the initial cost as going into the heavier use of technology, right? Creating all these products, so then it becomes more automated. And I think that's just the initial cost of it right now, but we're getting into a good spot with that. But yeah, that's what I would say with that. I think I'd have a better answer with more time.
Oh, yeah, you had a great answer. And Jim, what do you think? I mean, is there anything missing at this point, whether it's integrating, practice with game data, things like that, like whatever? The world is yours, Jim. What's still missing?
Man, like I said, I think that being able to compare and look at, some of the performance metrics with the actual, sports skill specific metrics. I think we're doing a better job with load management, all the progressions we've already talked about. But still, we see it all the time. Some of your best weight room performance athletes are not the ones that are playing. And some of your, worst weight room as far as this traditional strength and power and speed are just, these phenomenal, really sports skill specific. So I think, that's an area, I think that, I've seen different things over the years with, hand-eye coordination and those type of things. And we've even bought some of those things. And some of the things we found out on the back end were actually detrimental. So, seeing some really good, correlation there and okay, does using a different light system and being able to react, does that really correlate into improved performance on the field, regardless of the sport? And then I think there's, I think that I would like to see some more metrics, especially in the transverse plane, looking at power. That seems to be one yet that really, you can do some different things, but I don't feel that there's a really great metrics for looking at, rotational power.
And what sport would you say that would benefit you the most in?
Your baseball, softball sports.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, I'll be honest with you, Jim. Like, that's one of the sport. I was a baseball player, and I got a son who's a baseball player too. So, baseball is, near and dear to my heart. But like, I don't hear a lot of talk, because it's just such a completely different sport, when it comes to like the data and the metrics and the things like that. Yes, I'm all about, I know spin rate, I know, exit velocity, which I think is killing a lot of kids' swings. But like, I know all these things, but it's a little strange to me that we don't those performance metrics don't seem to, and I guess I'm going to ask you, are they correlating? Are they out there and I'm just not hearing about it?
Not that I'm aware of. It could very well be possible, but several buddies of mine are in MLB organizations and we have a really robust, hitting and we have all the data at the field here that you could want. And, we're still trying to figure that out, and I think you can measure rotational power, but a lot of times the load doesn't correlate or it's not the exact pattern and those type of things. So, and then I think too, you kind of get into maybe like, well, there's many different swings and a lot of those guys have power in different ways or that correlates differently. So, that's where that individualism and, really, is an interesting part of the puzzle especially in the baseball, softball world.
And Dave, what about you? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think like all the correlating all those things, it's definitely, I know right now we're getting metrics from all these different technologies and all that stuff. So it's easy to correlate if you know how to, code and stuff like that and
right.
have a good background in statistics. But in terms of having one piece of technology that does it all, that'd be pretty cool, at least even for one sport, right? So I definitely see that being a cool way like a futuristic thing. It definitely would be useful to see that and have all those metrics. But it also goes down to like analysis by paralysis or information overload, where sometimes it's like so much. And like Jim was mentioning earlier in our conversation, where it's like all these metrics, narrowing it down to 3 to 5 and just trying to get, a small piece of the puzzle little by little.
Yeah. And so, yeah, depending on whatever sport, you're in, just really honing in on, and that's why I like to ask the metrics trifecta question, because that, it really, it does help, because there's so many different things to look at, but it is really all about, using the data to complement your coaching. It's never going to replace coaches. You're just never, just watch Jim's viral YouTube video and you can never get that type of player coach relationship, from a sensor. You're just never going to do that. But to be able to have that kind of information to complement coaching. And Jim, I give you credit, for buying in. I've heard some other stories, too, from coaches who, even guys, old school NFL guys who have bought in they had to be sold the idea of using GPS and collecting data, and I give you credit, Jim, for leaning into it and using it the way you do.
Well, and I've told the entire staff that, like, hey, if you're not involved in this, if you're not learning it, you're not going to have a very long career. Like, 25 years ago that was the case, but now, I mean, you got to have an idea and you got to be exposed to it and be able to talk it, and you better be able to be very familiar with a lot of these different things.
Well, you guys are, and you shed a lot of light on a lot of great topics for us today. If somebody hears this, hopefully somebody hears this, but if somebody hears this and wants to reach out to one or both of you, what's an easy way? Jim, we'll start with you. What's an easy way to get a hold of you?
You can just shoot me an email, jkrumpos@arizona.edu.
And Day?
Same emails, the best way to reach me, and that's my full name, Dayannara Muñoz @arizona.edu. Well,
and Jim, you're going to have to track your YouTube video again, because I'm sure you're going to end up with the thousands more views after this podcast post. But no, this has been great. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time for us on the Xtra Edge podcast. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you. We enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And hey, if you know a great coach who's out there doing great things, winning games, and doing it with sports data and analytics, we would love to hear about them. We may ask them to be a future guest on the podcast. You can find us on Twitter and on Instagram @KINEXON Sports, or look for us on LinkedIn @KINEXON Sports and Media. Remember, we want you to innovate the game by collecting the data, getting those insights, and turning those insights into action. We will see you next time.